All right, welcome. Welcome to the live for this morning. This is your SitRep for the 27th of May, 2022. Thanks for playing along on either the YouTubes or the Instagrams. For those who haven't joined this before, if you're just wandering around the internet, stumbling around like a child in the dark forest, and you all of a sudden came across this, no, don't run. This is where I go through news stories that I find interesting over the past 24 hours, or it'll be 48 hours because I didn't do one yesterday. And we can best prepare ourselves for the uncertain future that we are facing and are always facing, really, in reality. Future's always uncertain. All right, so in some weather stuff, I always like to talk weather things because weather is universal. Extreme weather effects and weather stuff. I always like to talk weather things because weather is universal. Extreme weather effects can affect anyone in the world, no matter where you are. Even you who are hiding in those cities, in those vast concrete jungles, and you think, I have now defeated nature. You can't get me here. You're wrong. It can get you. And the earth will do certain things like throw hurricanes at you, throw earthquakes at you, and even fires. So let's talk about that. Hurricanes. The NOAA, the NOAA, which is the US version of the BOM. It's just a lot of acronyms this morning, isn't it? It's the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia. It's creating weird shadows. You can see my baldness this morning, taking in all its glory. The NOAA's come out and said the Atlantic hurricane season to be unusually active this year. What a strange coincidence. It's going to be unusually active. 3 to 6 major hurricanes expected. If anyone's been tracking hurricane season for the last few years, I remember looking at it at about 2018, 2019, just before the pandemic hit. And there was one point I was in the US and we were tracking, I forget the name of it now, but I was teaching a course there and one of their hurricanes was about to make landfall down around Florida. And one of the reporters that I was teaching said, have a look at this. And it showed all the hurricane events or whatever it was called, typhoon, cyclone event that was happening around the world at that time. I think there was 9 happening at once around the world. So again, these things are more prolific. If you live in and around coastal areas, these are things that can happen to you. So start to think about the effects that can happen. Obviously high winds, rain, storm surges, things like that. So if you do live in a hurricane prone area, obviously this is something you should have already been prepared for, but start to think about that, the prevalence of these increasing. So we're going to see more hurricanes. This is obviously the US, but I would also hazard a guess that this is going to be worldwide, seeing that hurricanes don't just generally form in one tiny area. Their effects, the reason they are actually created is a wider environmental effect, how they're actually created out to sea. So yeah, more weather sort of stuff. Earthquakes. Let's talk earthquakes. There was a 7.2 earthquake in Peru, near the Peru-Bolivia border. There was also an earthquake around LA last night. I think that was 4.5, I want to say. I don't actually have the story in front of me for that one, but I remember reading it. 4.5, one that happened in California, 4-point-something, and 7.2, which is obviously pretty full-on earthquake. So another couple of things that have popped up. I mean, earthquakes happening all the time, and they're not necessarily something that's, to do with any of the other stuff that we're talking about with climate change and things like that. But, it's always something to look out for, especially if you live in and around a fault line. They do happen outside of those areas as well, usually minor. I've certainly experienced an earthquake here in Australia. It's not exactly a frequent event here in Australia, but it does happen. But for my New Zealand cuzzy bros, that's something that you should probably be thinking about. The effects of earthquakes, because they can be quite prolific in that area because you're sitting on a fault line. Obviously, we don't need to cast our minds back too far into history to see what the effects can be. We can look at what happened in Christchurch a number of years ago with the earthquake that hit there and decimated that city. So earthquakes, another thing we need to think about and prepare for. Where are we? Pakistan. Where did you go, Pakistan? Here we are. Pakistan, wildfires bring down. Here we are. Pakistan, wildfires bring destruction. Balochistan. Yeah. All right. Not sure where that is in Pakistan, but they've got wildfires going on there, amongst other things that are going on there. So Pakistan is also in the grips of some quite large civil unrest at the same time. So in a different part of the country, obviously what we're talking about is the capital now, Islamabad. Just a quick recap on what the situation is in Pakistan. Imran Khan got booted, voted no confidence. Out you go, buddy. And on his way out, he was like, by the way, this is a trick from the outside forces. They're installing a puppet government. It's all the US's fault. I'll be back. And fell into the pit of doom. And people were like, no, we don't like that. That you're installing this puppet government. And so they started a series of rioting, and it's been progressively getting worse and worse. And now Imran Khan has formed up a bit of a column of people, and they've been heading in towards Islamabad. Apparently they've hit the outskirts of Islamabad now. And unsurprisingly, the reaction to that from the government forces is unpleasant at best. They have now just deployed the army against them, against their own people in their own country. So not a good thing going on there. And wildfires burning in that country. Wildfires of two different kinds, really, going on in that country. So yeah, Pakistan, not doing too well. And as always, I think, SitRep is something that we're going to see increasingly around the world, and it's something we need to seriously consider how we operate around as human beings, because Australia is not immune to self-defense, to civil unrest, to riots and such. What we've certainly seen some that have blown up a bit more than usual over the last 2 years. Generally, I like to say that Australians on the whole, we're pretty shit at rioting. Like I for a job, I kind of, this is part of what I look at and teach. And then I look at Australia and I see ours, and I like drive through Canberra and I see people protesting the war in Ukraine, or protesting climate change or whatever. And I'm just like, man, this is pretty, on the scale of things, this is pretty sad. Every now and then we form up and do an all right riot. Not that I'm saying right's good or bad, they just are. What I'm trying to illustrate here is that the likelihood of danger from a full riot situation in Australia, I view it as, I'm looking at you, more people, more danger. That's generally the way I look at the world. So thinking about being anywhere around them, we can see that these things are forming. We can see them on the news. There's usually information put out there that people are going to gather on a certain date at a certain time. We can avoid that area. And that's my number one recommendation to people. Avoid those areas. Don't take your family out on those days in those areas. All right, let's start jumping around the world today. I don't have much time, by the way. I've got work today. That's why I'm doing it earlier and trying to pump through it. But I wanted to get one out today, so just so we can all keep our minds ticking over to what's going on in the world. And because I read a couple of really good comments on the YouTube as well. If you guys keep pumping out those good comments on YouTube, I'm going to start switching where I look at. So then the Instagram people will be missing out. They'll be like, he's not looking at me. He's looking at YouTube. I'm looking at you right now, YouTube. No, but thank you for those comments, by the way. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate people putting in these comments on any of the platforms, saying that they like this. Because, for me, I'm reading this stuff anyway in the morning. It's like my personal time, coffee time, sit there, read the news, pour through things. I don't mind doing this. I enjoy it. I'm going to continue rambling on. As long as there's at least one person on here listening to me, I'll continue doing it. All right, let's have a look at the price of shit in the world. Let's talk about semiconductors to start off with. Electronic crisis due as chip giants hike prices. So semiconductors, for those who don't know, they're a pretty important thing that are in all the stuff that you're currently staring at, and in just about everything else that we own nowadays. Really, really important component of electronics. Mainly, they come out of a little place called Taiwan. Oh my God, it's all coming together. Anyway, price of everything's going up at the moment. So people then who are making shit from compounding effect of price hikes. So semiconductor-reliant product prices are set to shoot up. This is coming from the major electronic producers, and just talking about companies like Samsung, Intel. Start to go from there. All those big electronic companies that make freaking everything, they're going to start to hike their prices. What they're saying is actually like chemicals used in semiconductors have become 10 to 20% more expensive this year, while energy prices have also increased. So all this, like I said, is a compounding effect where then end product things that take many, many different things and people also to get in there and create them, then that product now has 10% from that, 20% from here, 30% from there, 15% from here. And they're like, hey, by the way, this is now 150% more than it was last year. And then, a lot of these sort of socialist leaning governments, or even communist leaning governments, as far as I'm concerned, will go, they're price gouging. How dare they? Oh, they're ripping you honest people off. Whereas you and I can look at it and go like, well, no, you actually fucked this system in the first place. And they're just dealing with your, well, no, you actually fucked this system in the first place. And they're just dealing with your fuckery. And now you're trying to price cap them on top of that, which is going to destroy this market, which is then going to have follow-on effects for people who don't have jobs and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I knew I'd get a rant in today. There it is. That's the world according to Stuart Gern. There we go. All right. Let's talk about interconnecting stuff that's happening in the world with alliances as well. Russia looks to boost Iran trade to $10 billion. So Iran and Russia, and these are two of those countries that I keep yapping on about as part of that broader sort of alliance. It's usually when I'm throwing out an alliance, the core part of it is usually something like Brazil, Russia, India, China, the BRIC, and then I start to go like, oh, and Iran, if we're thinking more about political sort of ties that make sense to me, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. We've also got countries like South America, Venezuela sort of floating in there as well. Starting to form this alliance and starting to really solidify this other US dominant world. So the US is squeezing other people out and squeezing their fist, and all these other places are popping out through the fingers, to use a Star Wars analogy. Thanks, Princess Leia. And all these people are squeezed out of being like, well, why don't we just start doing stuff? So they're they're calling this the North-South International Transport Corridor. Iran sitting south of Russia, so they can start to pump things through there, trying to increase trade between Moscow and Tehran. So they've actually jumped already 81% in the amount of trade that they're doing to 4 billion. And they've come out and said, 4 billion is cool. We want to go to 10 billion now. So you can see these things forming now, how these countries are starting to financially tie themselves together, trying to boost cheap Russian oil imports. So they're stocking up. The amount of ships that are heading from Russia to China ports with oil is already up 20%. They're looking like they're going to get they're at 20 of 21 this month, and they're aiming at 33 ships heading in there, which is the highest intake that Beijing's had from Russia, from Moscow, since 2016. So, bam, another thing we can see these guys really forming up together, and it's a bit of a FU to the states who, think they're crushing it. A little bit of good news that came out overnight. who knows what it is? This is from Russian propaganda, so take that as you will. But I always like to latch onto these sorts of things. I'm like, well, anything that sees us trending in a good direction, I'm also like, you know, I want to keep my eyes open to that. I'm not just sitting here staring at the shit. Kremlin comments on reported peace plans for Ukraine. So there's there apparently what we were hearing yesterday was like the peace plans are off the table, everything's crumbled, everything's shit, nobody's going anywhere. We've seen Ukrainian ministers come out and they're saying like it's fucked, like nothing's happening. But there is some counter narrative to that as well. So some people are coming out and saying, no, there is this, it was called the Italian proposal, and people were like, sounds fucking mysterious, where's that coming from? But apparently there is one, it's out there. I want to show you what this there's a 4-step roadmap, and I'll just explain what it is. 4-step roadmap to peace includes a ceasefire. That can happen. Demilitarization of the front line in Ukraine. That could happen. Diplomatic settlement of the status of Crimea. That's going to be a bit of a stumbling block. And the Donbass republics as well thrown in there. So Crimea and the Donbass republics, Russia saying that we want, just solidify them, just say that they're a thing. So, you know, those 3 parts there, that's on Ukraine really, to agree. So, you know, those 3 parts there, that's on Ukraine really, to agree to, that they can and they can't. And this last part, I think, is probably the part that means this whole thing won't happen. And an overreaching agreement on security in Europe. So essentially, I think like what I'm reading here, the subtext is they're saying NATO has to back off, that they've already overreached. They have to pull back their lines now, and agree that there cannot be overreaching in Europe. That's what I'm reading in that, and that is the part that I think will not happen. Absolutely not. I think NATO is now on the offensive, and I can't see them backpedaling at this point. So, I mean, I'd like to believe that we live in a world where NATO can look at this and go like, you know what, we can secure other countries, and we don't need to push up right up onto Russia and threaten them in this way. We can all step back. I'd like to believe we live in that world. What I see tells me different though, and I usually act on what I see in the world. But anyway, fumbling around over there at the moment in that part of the world. Let's talk about our part of the world, being Australia, and in particular, let's talk about the South China Sea. Military drills near Taiwan are a solemn warning to Washington from Beijing. So China has gone out and done some military drills. It was in the news a couple of days ago. It wasn't like something that just popped out of nowhere, although it was kind of out of nowhere from the larger perspective of how military drills work. Obviously, like swinging their dick around a little bit out in this area. We've also, you know, you're tying this in with the Biden trip as well. So he's coming to this area, and now China's showing its might a little bit. Okay, yep, you know, this is positioning. We're all seeing this, them shouting out on the world stage. It is what it is. What is really interesting though, and I don't have the story for this, I just saw a video of it, so it's unverified at this stage, but allegedly a Chinese submarine fired a rocket into the sky in a drill, and you know, you can't just go around in the world just shooting off rockets into the sky unless you want to get in a fair bit of trouble, because there are like private ships and merchant ships that are going all throughout the sea. So you can't just go there, you know, in your military might, shooting off things and firing into nowhere. Actually, there's a process that needs to be adhered to. There's international law that needs to be adhered to. And you need to put this out and say like, hey, we're going to fire a missile from a submarine tomorrow at this time. Well, they didn't do that. They did put out a warning, but it was apparently just before they fired it. They're like, by the way, all ships in the air are about to fire a missile. Boom, off it goes. And so, you know, there's some footage from I think it was a US ship, the guy who's talking sounds like he's from the US, and you can see one of their missiles streaking up into the sky. I thought that was pretty interesting. I thought, like, what are you trying to say here, China? What are you trying to do? I think it's pretty obvious what they're trying to say there. It's like, we own this area, we're the big dogs here, and we do what we want, which is what China always does. Chinese foreign minister, I reported on this, is doing a trip to 8 nations in the Pacific in the next 10 days. Those are Fiji, Kiribati, Samoa, Tonga, Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, and Solomon Islands in the next 10 days. I've been to like 3 or 4 of these places. These are very close to our back door, and it is very obvious what they're doing here. They are securing up, and they're trying to create a Pacific Rim, if you will, a wall there. I think if I was somebody who was looking at this from a military perspective, and I was thinking Australia or the West versus China, I would say this is a brilliant move to sever the US's main ally in this area, in Australia, off from the actual theatre that we're looking at, the South Pacific, the South China area, South China Sea area. That's what it looks like to me. And if they somehow convinced all these countries, it would be literally a severance where Australia would then have to like go around that entire area in order to deploy any sort of effect up into there. So yeah, that's happening. Again, like, what's the effect of that to the average Australian? Fucking nothing. It doesn't change my life at all. I can still go down and get a coffee after this. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Super tired. Didn't sleep at all last night. But anyway, yeah, it's not going to affect anything in the short term, but this has pretty big medium to long-term effects, potential effects. And again, I'm just looking at this from the perspective of what's happening in our area. Okay, could this kick off into something else? Does it look like it might be kicking off into something else? Yes, it does to me. It may not to you. If your analysis tells you different, then act accordingly to that. But to me, I'm looking at it and I'm going like, this, I can hear those drums, those old familiar drums of war starting to beat a little bit, and familiar drums of war starting to beat a little bit. And so I'm going, okay, what do we need to start to do to prepare ourselves as individuals for that inevitability, that possibility, I should say. So if I was a fighting age male in Australia right now, I'd be thinking, well, you know, that could severely affect my life in the future. If I was an aging male in Australia, like me, you know, I'm starting to think, okay, how can I best prepare my family for the future? So, you know, what happened last time we were at war? Did we have rationing? Did we have, you know, shortages of things? Are we going to have shortages in rationing anyway? Will this exacerbate the problem? Most likely, yes, I think. So that's what I'm thinking about. Prepare thyself. Other interesting news outside of this area: Iran engineer dies at suspected nuclear research center. Iranian nuclear researchers, man. If I was somebody who was handing out life insurance, and somebody came up to me and said, "Yeah, I'm an Iranian," and said, "Yeah, I'm an Iranian engineer. I work on nuclear energy," I'd be like, "I'm sorry, man. I can't insure you. It's just not a good bet." I shouldn't laugh, but it's pretty obvious, I think, to me. I look at something like this news story, I'm like, oh wow, mysteriously that a bunch of people died in an accident in a facility that is suspected to be making or trying to make nuclear weapons. Iran. Who could have done that? Who doesn't like Iran? Who doesn't like the idea of Iran gaining nuclear weapons? And who also has a long and illustrious history of assassinating people, doing some stuff. But yeah, again, I just like to show you that in the world at the moment, and this is one theater that is a really hot one: Israel, Iran, Israel, and you know, a lot of countries in the Middle East. There's a lot of tension there. There's a lot of things that are going on there. There's actually been a lot to talk about it, but this one, I thought I'd just throw this one in. I just found it super interesting. All right, last two things, and then I'm going to leave you. Let's talk about food again. France offers food vouchers. Oh, that sounds great, doesn't it? Food vouchers. Oh, but hang on, 2022 kids can understand. We'll do it as a universal basic income as food assistance. So this is the French authorities. They're starting, apparently, allegedly, I haven't seen it, not in France, but allegedly starting to hand out food vouchers to people who are struggling to help people cope with inflation, but digitally. So, you know, you got to do it via your phone, I'm guessing. There's probably some sort of identification process that must be met, because they're not just going to hand them out willy-nilly. And I must be met because they're not just going to hand them out willy-nilly. And I'm going to assume, without telling you to suck, most people who are probably looking to longer-term effects of what that could be. Now the government is in control of what you eat and in control of your food. When somebody becomes in control of your food, they become in control of you. So when somebody controls one part of your life, a very important part, food, then they are in control of you. So this is yet another thing where I am very much encouraging you to take control of your food supply, grow your own stuff as much as possible. Really encourage local growers. If you can buy things off friends who are growing, if you can buy things off farmers who are growing, and start to create those connections within your community, so your community is becoming more food resilient within itself. This sort of stuff disturbs me. It's like 1984 dystopian future type stuff, and it is becoming more food resilient within itself. This sort of stuff disturbs me. It's like 1984 dystopian future eggs, but go do it. Speaking of sucking eggs, egg production in the US, what's going on there? Obviously, we've had that bird flu kicking around, 24 million birds killed since March. We've seen a 3.9% decline in eggs entering the supply chain, which is that's neither here nor there. But what is here or there is the average cost of a dozen eggs. It's gone from $1.40 in 2019 for a dozen eggs to $2.52. These are American prices, by the way. If you're sitting there in Australia going like, where can I get these cheap eggs? Because our eggs are obviously a lot more expensive than that. $1.40 to $2.50. That's quite a substantial. That's a $1.12 increase in price. Quite substantial. But what they're expecting, what they're telling people, is prepare for $3.04. That's what they're predicting it to be next year, by the end of this year. Sorry. So that's what they're looking at. Again, I'm always looking at the food prices, the indexes. They're the important ones to me. All this is telling me is exactly what I just said. We need to take control of our own food system as much as possible, to as much of a percentage as you possibly can. Be trying to feed yourself. Look at food that's out there at the moment. If you can afford what's there, if it hasn't gone up too much already, start to think about, can I get more of this and store it long term? That's really where I'm thinking about. That's what I'm doing. So start to look at that yourself. Start to look at how much you have on hand, how much you can store, and I recommend you do store up a little bit more food, and then really get in those gardens. Get in those gardens. Start building those gardens. I know if you're anywhere around where I am, it's freezing freaking cold at the moment. So growing is not the best season to grow. There are still some things we can grow. But start to plan it out. Start to think about this. If you can afford it, start to buy up those things that you're going to need to garden. And even if you're not going to plant the garden in the next month, 2 months, 4 months, you're going to have the stuff ready for spring to spring into action. You're going to have the seeds. You're going to have the mulch or the compost. You're going to have the tools that you're going to need. You're going to have the space that you're going to need. So that's it for today, gang. Leave you on that high note. Get out there and garden. Get in your garden. As always, if there's any questions, shoot them through to me. Again, really appreciate the comments that everyone's sending through to me. Stay safe out there. Keep your eyes open. And Semper Paratus.